Okay, bringing this meeting to order. Tonight's meeting of the Facilities and Finance Committee, scheduled for 5:45 p.m. on October 12th. Is the meeting properly posted?
It has been.
Okay, great. So we have that done, verification of meeting posted. Opportunity for citizens to speak. I don't see any citizens tonight, and we have no correspondence. Action items. First action item is approval of monthly vouchers. Were any calls in on monthly vouchers? No. Okay, no calls on monthly vouchers. Any discussion on monthly vouchers? Comments? Entertain a motion. Mr. Como?
I move to approve the vouchers as presented.
Mr. Como moves to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. McCaffrey. Any further discussion? Okay, no further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Item number 2, rescind approval of master equipment lease purchase agreement. I believe we're going to have a presentation on why we want to rescind that approval first.
Yeah, I can provide you a brief summary. Back in spring, April, I believe, the board approved the purchase of 7 vans tied to a lease arrangement. And looking at it further, we're making the recommendation to not enter into those lease and purchase those vans outright, saving the district just shy of $9,000 in interest expense over the period of the lease, and providing some budget flexibility in the upcoming years that the lease otherwise would have ran. So there's 2 motions. One's to rescind your previous action or the board's previous action, and then the second is the approval, the outright purchase of those vans.
Questions, comments from the committee members? Mr. Edlin?
Had we actually entered into an agreement to lease? I thought that we approved that, but I didn't know what the start date was, or,
They were approved, but they were never signed or finalized.
okay.
So they're just sitting on Lori Dudley's desk right now, waiting for a decision. We thought we'd bring it to you since there's a chance to save those interest dollars.
Okay. Do we have a plan for turnover? How long, a lease, typically at the end of the lease, you turn it back in, and after so many years, has there been any discussion on the length of time that we'd want to hang on to them before we decide to either sell them outright or trade them in, or?
Yeah, I haven't had a specific conversation with Glenn about that, but based on, and it's like that in McGuanago as well, the ones you purchase, you tend to hold on to. I think we're replacing some very old vans now, so at the service building. So my take would be is you hold on to them until they're not serviceable anymore.
Okay. How many miles we typically put on a van in a year? Worst
That-
case scenario.
That I couldn't answer for you. I have no idea.
Thank you.
Mr. Como?
I think the original lease was to purchase at the end anyways. And so I'm glad that we didn't actually, I was confused. I thought we had already entered into these leases already, so we wouldn't have a penalty then. Because we would have been penalized, I'm sure, if we would have rescinded it once we started it. So,
Correct.
yeah, I think this is probably a better way to go. And I think our intention was, with the lease to buy, that we were going to try and keep them for a long time.
I'd be in agreement with that.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Is there any reason why we didn't buy these vehicles? You probably don't know, Darren, but I'm looking at that.
Well, usually when you have, this many vehicles, it's the dollar amount you're sitting at, looking at, and the outright purchase of 7 vans adds up pretty
I
quickly.
guess my question is, why didn't we purchase them in April, which is what, almost 6 months ago, when we approved it? It kind of makes me nervous that we approve stuff at committee and then have open and purchase whenever we want to. That's not really the way we should be running.
My understanding was the deal wasn't there until
Okay.
after, for whatever happened when they, after the board approved it, they looked at, the old vans and so on, and apparently the deal got better.
Okay.
At that time. It might have been a budget issue too, but as my understanding is, you all came back and said, maybe this, we can do this for
Buying
us.
would be a better deal,
Yeah.
the interest rate, okay.
Mr. Edlin?
Given that we're gonna be doing a, purchase, fleet size purchase, in my opinion, but Is this the best deal that we can get?
All I can say is, from my knowledge of purchasing these types of vehicles, it sounded really good. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know, I don't know if anyone here has gone out and marketed or checked the market on these, but, the net price sounded very, very good. But I can't tell you it's the absolute best deal, but,
Yeah.
I know they did a lot of work, bidding to get to this particular company.
Yeah, I know that Ewald is they do a lot of work with a lot of districts. I just, I think that may be because of the financing that they're able to come up with, but in this case, we're doing, outright cash purchases, and I'm wondering if we ought to do an RFP and throw it out there.
Yeah, there may be potential for that, but.
Really, the option right now is because, we have the vehicles.
we have 'em.
The option would be either one or the other. Either we would go with the CalFirst lease, or we would purchase them outright right now.
I don't get it. Why is that the only two options? I mean,
Because-
just with Ewald, right?
No, we have the vans right now.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
We already took possession of the
Yes.
vans, of the vehicles.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, pursuant,
Got
the
it.
board approved the lease, we got them, we were ready to sign the papers, and I think they came back and said, here is, if you purchase these with the, I can't remember how they were gonna, I wasn't in on the detail, but I do know they came back, Ewald came back and said, we have a better deal for you if you purchase these outright, so. They did do the RFP for the lease portion of
Okay.
it.
Yes.
And then they came back and said, we can, because we were gonna purchase at the end of the lease anyway. So, again, the people who handled the detail aren't here this evening, unfortunately. So, but all I do recall, when it was brought to my attention, it seemed like, a extremely good deal, and in a past life, I did buy many, many vehicles, and it seemed to be a good option for us.
Yeah, it's not what I would say the situation is that you got a choice in how you, really kind of who you're dealing with. You're dealing with a leasing company, which is a kind of a third party from the dealership, or you're dealing directly with the dealership on a capital purchase. So I would assume on the leasing side, there's overhead associated with that. And with the way vehicles are lasting nowadays versus what they used to 15, 20 years ago, maybe the capital is a better way to go versus the overhead. And from the dealership point of view, they'd probably prefer you did the capital versus the lease. Maybe I don't care that much, but if they, certainly it's not to their disadvantage for us to buy it outright. Mr. McCaffrey?
How long have we had the vans for?
2008, those vans were originally purchased.
What, the new ones?
September 15th.
So, do I have a motion for rescinding the approval of the lease?
I will so move.
Ms. Madden moves to rescind the lease.
Second.
Second, Mr. McCaffrey. We have a motion to rescind approval of master equipment lease purchase agreement, and a motion from Ms. Madden, a second from Mr. McCaffrey. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next item is approval of equipment purchase. So, in this regard, we already have the vehicles, correct?
Yes.
Now we're just determining how to pay for them,
Right.
whether we go ahead and purchase them outright or go back into some other arrangement. Any other questions for board members, committee members? Mr. Edlin?
I recall part of this discussion was, or a question at that time was, are these all of the vehicles for the district that were purchasing at the same time? I remember we had talked about possibly rotating in purchases as they came off a lease, so that we didn't have to buy an entire new fleet the next time around. From a capital standpoint, kept the cash flow going a little bit better.
If you're asking, is this replacing our entire fleet, the answer is no, if you include the service building and everything else. I don't know the number of vehicles we have in the district, but this is a fraction of that total, I think.
Okay, so these were just for the athletic events or something like that, if I remember right. These were,
Well, for, yeah, the high schools use them for taking kids to events. They use them maybe for taking kids to the dual enrollment program at WCTC, some of those kind of, not just athletics, but all sorts of different events.
Okay.
throughout the year.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, it's just a more cost-effective way to transport students in extracurricular activities instead of renting out a whole bus for that event. So it's those smaller groups, cross-country, just those tinier groups that don't need a whole bus. So I think we moved towards that quite a number of years ago for that particular purpose. Try and save money on transportation.
My guess is we're rotating vehicles from one purpose to another purpose based on age. So our newer vehicles are probably being used by the schools for transportation, older vehicles move over into the service group.
That's correct.
Is that correct, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments from board members? Do I have a motion? Mr. Como?
I move to approve the purchase of 7 2015 Ford XLT 150 vans from Ewald Fleet Solutions in the amount of $174,454.
I have a motion from Mr. Como. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Madden. Further discussion? Don't see any further discussion? Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Number 4, approval of the 2015-16 budget subject to modifications made in October. Gentlemen,
Well, this is continuing of the process. We originally submitted the budget for review in July, and then we approved publication in August, had a public hearing last month, and now with receiving the property valuations and the third Friday count, we just have 2 final pieces before the levy can be set. So this is just an updated document reconciliation for the adopted budget. So the second page of the attachment of the reconciliation for the adopted budget is just the DPI approved format. Pages 1, 2, and 3, those are the required DPI approved formats. And then if you go to page 4, you'll see these are the summary of the budget changes from the previous document that you have seen. Our revenue increased in Fund 10. This is on page 4 of the reconciliation of the adopted budget. On page 4, the revenue in Fund 10 increased in state tuition based on actual claim submissions by $6,497. And then we had a decrease in our per pupil aid based on our current enrollment. A 21 pupil reduction times $150 per pupil resulted in a $3,150 reduction. And then what we did in our original budget is we did not put in what our actual end-of-year financial results were. So between the revenue limit, the levy, and the equalization aid, there's going to be that change. So that's, the original state equalization aid was based on the original projections of our budgeted end-year financial results. So when our actual end-of-year financial results came in, it increased our equalization aid by $1,737,000. Then we had an increase in our computer aid from our original projection. It went from $496,549 to $465,553 for a $35,996 increase. And then the general levy went down because the equalization aid went up based on having our end-of-year financial results for the equalization aid. So this left us with an additional $209,614 from our previous estimate, and this is how it was distributed. We had a reduction in, if you go to page 6, there was a reduction in our state tuition payment based on actual claims of $22,000. So then what that did is it increased the transfer from the general fund to make up for that. So going back to page 4, that was the reason for the $22,000 increase in the special education transfer to Fund 27. And then the vehicles that we just agreed to purchase as a lump sum instead of leasing them was an increase in the vehicle purchase of $174,444, and we were able to take out the capital lease principal that we had originally put in there of $37,000. So then that just left us with $50,170. And in talking with our technology department and our administration, we wanted to put $50,170 to increase our safety and security equipment purchases. So that accounts for the change in the general fund from what was originally proposed. And then going to page 5, that's just the Fund 21 donations. When you actually get all that information in the carryover, this is the time where we put that amount in. The donations received of $55,041, because that was not in the original budget. And then it just shows you on page 5, the second line from the last, the special projects, the fund expenditure changes, and the change in the fund balance, because we didn't originally budget Fund 21 in the original budget. And then page 6, we've already discussed that. So if you go to page 7, that just shows our fund summary right now and where we stand. This is very similar to what you have received before. It's just that change of $202,000 from the general fund from the previous budget. So this is where we stand, our subtotal of our revenues and our operating transfers in, which brings us our total revenues, and then our expenditures, and it's all broken down by fund. And at the very bottom, it shows our opening fund balance. And then if you take the change in fund balance based on the budget, it shows our ending fund balance based on budget amounts. It's all the same as we have seen in the past, except for that $202,000 change. And then if you would like, I could just show you, and you know, Todd talked about this in our last meeting. If you want to go to final page 15. And then we have some charts to back that up, going back. We had originally, on page 15, on our tax levy summary, we had originally, in the middle of the page, the estimated equalized property valuation. We had originally projected in the budget 15-16 a 1% increase in our equalized value. And, you know, and as we had thought that it did increase, and now it's 2.05% increase in equalized value or property valuation from the previous year. So obviously that's going to have an impact on our mill rate or our tax rate per thousand of equalized value. In the public hearing, we had anticipated it being $9.10, and with the increase in the property valuation, it reduces the mill rate to $9.02 on a tax rate per thousand of equalized value. And then if you were to look at pages 12 and 13, it kind of charts out our property valuation history and our mill rate history on pages 12 and 13. And as you can see, our mill rate has dropped from where we were in 2014 of 959 to 908 last year to 902 this year. And that kind of goes hand in hand with our property valuation history, as you can see on page 12.
Mr. Como?
Was 2011 the first year that it decreased the equalized property value? I think it started actually decreasing years prior to that. I know we're only going back to 2011,
I believe so.
I would assume it was
2008?
2008 when the economy.
Yeah.
There might have been a year lag there,
But
but
that it lags as much as a year or two
Okay.
before that property goes down, because we're actually working off of the prior year's assessment. So, the economy could have tanked in 2000, but we wouldn't probably feel that in property values till 2009 or maybe even 2010.
Yeah, 9, 10, or 10 or 11.
I just remember that first year where it was about a 4 or 5% decrease, and at least when have been on the board, we've never had a decrease. I think, I don't know if there was ever a decrease, going back even a couple of decades, so that was a pretty big surprise. I think 1% is what we had originally estimated this year. I think that was our best guess, so I thought that worked out well, that, we were a little conservative on that, so that helped to, reduce the tax rate here a little, the mill rate a little bit here towards the end. So, that's always a tricky assumption, is where do you come in for equalized property values? And we don't get the information till mid-October, and it plays such a big role, in how things come out. So, I was pleased with how we projected this early on. It worked out pretty well. Some years in the past, it hasn't worked out well. We haven't made it a good educated guess.
Yeah, if you were to look on page 10, it does show us the change in the equalized value, but again, it's from 2011 on. It shows us, and the third line from the bottom, our property valuation starting in 2011, all the way to 2016, and then the change in the mill rate.
And it's good news that our property values are going back up, that, hopefully the economy's moving a little bit better in the right direction. I know it's still very sluggish, still very slow, but that's a positive indicator. And if you take a look at our mill rate, I mean, back in 2011, we were at $8.96. We're pretty close to that, so.
Yes. So this is something we went over a few times already, and what we're going to do is obviously, on the 15th, we're going to get the state equalization aid, and then we're also going to get the voucher adjustment on the 15th. So we'll be able to then finalize the levy for the special meeting on October 27th.
Yeah, we've agendized the levy as information only. We know the sum of the revenue limit, we just don't know the breakout of the pieces between aid and levy, so we'll finalize that at the end of the month, so we can proceed into the next fiscal year.
Additional questions, Mr. Edlin?
Mill rate is one thing, and then the other thing that really drives us is the levy, which is our actual hard expenses that we budget for every year. And we're up 1.3% at the capped tax levy, but we exceeded that cap too by almost $1 million. So that total number, I don't see that reflected in here, but
Well, if you were to look, it shows on the tax levy summary on page 15. There's two components to that. If you were to look at our current state equalization aid, it's projected to decrease, focusing on page 15, to decrease 1,351,000, or 2.61% from the previous year. And the decrease in equalization aid causes the levy amount to increase as part of the revenue cap formula. So that's one of the reasons that the levy has went up 1.33% on the very bottom, the certified tax levy. And if you were to look at what you were referring to as the debt service levy, which is in the middle of the page, the total tax levy before computer aid, that's increasing 1.31%. And it's a direct reflection of the reduction in our state equalization aid. It's part of the revenue cap formula.
If aid would have stayed flat from last year, we'd actually be looking at a levy decrease right now. But as you know from being on the board, that aid number is another hard thing to try to project out.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, and as you look on page 14 at the history, the tax levy history, back in 2011, you know, we have two numbers that we're looking at, the capped amount and anything that is exempt that goes beyond that. We have, in 2011 to 2014, we continuously went down on the levy, and we slightly went up last year, and we're slightly going up this year. So we've been trying to do what we can do to maintain those expenses and those costs to keep that down as much as possible.
Yeah, just quickly, could you give a, what should I say, Cliff Notes explanation of the difference between the exempt tax levy and the cap tax levy?
Sure.
And, you know, historically, we've had as much as 4.3 million. In 2015, it doesn't show any red there.
Yeah,
And
what-
then in 2016, we have 24,000.
Yeah, I anticipated that. I went back to the 2010-11, and the breakdown for that 4,322,822, that was referendum approved debt of 4,223,000. And then the difference, which you have in most years, is the prior year levy chargeback of 99,822. So that consisted of, that's what the breakdown was of the 2011 amount. And then in 11-12, we had referendum approved debt of 3.2 million. And then the prior levy chargeback of 45,835. And in 12-13, referendum approved debt of 1,053,000, and then a prior year chargeback of 49,870.
Okay. So it's, in essence, we had the referendum that was approved way back in, I think, 2001. That finally got all paid out. We ended up being more or less debt-free as a district, with the exception of the state borrow we had to
Yes.
cover OPEB. But relative to the referendum, that was all paid off, basically going into 2014.
Correct.
Okay. And by 2015, we were completely paid off. And then the debt that we're carrying now, that's under exempt tax levy, that'd be for the capital improvements project, basically, or would that be for the computer fund?
Well, in 2014, that $98,073, that was again like a prior year levy chargeback for uncollected taxes.
Okay,
And then in the 2016, the 24,657, again, that's for uncollected property
okay,
taxes.
so it's uncollected.
And then the other debts, the debt service levy we have now, that 878,673, that's due to the energy efficiency exemption minus the savings that we have anticipated.
And that falls into what we call the cap tax levy, or is it separate from that?
Well, it's not part of,
It's not part of that chart on page
not part of
4?
this chart, because
On
this
page
chart
14.
was talking about that referendum approved, the referendum approved debt. It's a separate,
Okay.
it's a separate chart.
So when this chart 14 says property tax levy history, it's not showing,
It's not showing the energy efficiency.
okay. I think that was Mr. Evans' thoughts, okay.
But it is on the tax levy summary.
On which page is that?
On page
Page
15,
15, yeah.
that 878,673, which is the 1.1 million minus the energy efficiency savings.
Okay, so it's netted out to 878
Yes.
after we subtract this, the savings attributed to the energy efficiency.
Correct.
program. Okay. And that represents, that debt service levy represents,
The debt service levy, that's,
represents less than 1% of our total revenue cap.
yes, it's about 10 cents on the mill rate.
10%, 10 cents on the mill rate.
Very small.
All counts.
Does.
Yeah, all counts. Okay. Any other questions on the budget? Mr. Edlin?
Hang on just one second. I don't have any questions questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, do I have a motion? We need a motion, this is an action. My sheet of paper. Do I have a motion for approval of 2015-16 budget, subject to modifications made in October?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. McCaffrey. Do I have a second?
Second?
Second by Mr. Como. Further discussion? Mr.
I
Edley?
did have one more question. Joe, I know I saw it in here somewhere, but I buzzed right past it again. Looking for the total in the fund balance.
That's on, Mr. Edlin, that's on page 7. On the bottom of the page. It has it by fund. It shows us our June 30th, 2015 fund balance, and then if you were to take the change in fund balance based on the budget, the 2016 amount.
Quick question. We had a community service amount that was in surplus. Is that still, I mean, that was way back when. Has that disappeared long ago?
Yes, that's the last fund, the community service budget. Our fund balance at the beginning of June 30, 2015 is $160,000, 221.
Okay,
And then we're projecting to keep spending it down, as we've discussed. It'll be $85,034 at the end of this fiscal year.
so right now in this budget, it shows that our community service budget is $75,187.
Correct.
And we're pulling that out of a fund balance reserve from previous community service levies.
Yes.
So, in the future, there may be is that still possible to do a community service levy, or has that been eliminated completely by the state?
No, you can do it if you were taxing for it prior to Act 32. I think Act 32 changed it, that whatever your levy was that prior year, that's what it has to be forever, and it was zero for a couple of years because we were trying to buy down the fund balance, and so we got caught in a bad situation, so.
Oh, well, I mean, so it shall be.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Como?
For the second year in a row, we have some good news in that we no longer have to do a short-term borrow. That's a good thing for our district. In years past, we've spent interest to make sure we had enough cash to pay our bills throughout the year. And I know back in the earlier 2000s, maybe mid-2000s, we had spent upwards of $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 on interest for that borrow. So not having to make that borrow and having a healthy fund balance is a really good thing, and we've worked very hard in this district for a lot of years, actually for a couple of decades. Back in 1993, we had no fund balance, zip, nada. And so that has cost us over time in interest payments to make sure that we're able to make our bills, our cash flow throughout the year. We couldn't meet without that short-term borrow. So we no longer have that, and that's a positive.
Mr. Edlin?
Thank you. Joe, I had, I like to see a breakdown of this fund, because when we say fund balance, we've talked about there's restricted funds within this that we can't touch, because it's like our reserve for our health insurance.
Sure.
And
That's on, if you look at the budget adoption, Mr. Edlin, on page 1, the very top of page 1, it gives a breakdown of
oh, very
that.
good.
And so if you go to the second column, the unaudited 2014-15, it shows us the beginning fund balance of $31,127,000, and then it just gives that breakdown. The $816,000, that just consists of the prepaids and the warehouse inventory. The $5 million is what you just discussed, is for the self-insurance. And then the $2,258,000 was, at the time of the fiscal end of year, that was the amount in committed purchase orders. So you could really just take that balance, that 2,258,000 plus the unassigned of 27,600. And that would give you the breakdown that you had referred to.
I appreciate that very much. It kind of gives us a perspective of, you know, as Mr. Como pointed out, we had to borrow to meet the short-term borrow in order to meet our bills at the end of our budget cycle every year because there wasn't enough cash flow to keep us going. And so this will give us a gauge, this $27,600,000 is what we have in an account to carry us through. Do you know what we would have ended up with at the end of the year had we had to have done a short-term borrow?
Well, this year, it just depends on what your fund balance for the previous years. I mean, it's been decreasing because our fund balance has been increasing.
True.
So the last year that we did have to do a short-term borrow, I mean, we didn't have to borrow very much.
Right.
And it was like 22,000 in interest. But again, depending on what your fund balance is what your short-term borrow would
Yeah,
be.
that was the number I was trying to zero in on. I'm trying to figure out where we end up with the shortfall at the end of the year, had we not. In other words, how much is in here that is actually covering that shortfall, and how much is actually surplus?
Yeah, it just, there's different timings with the state payments, and that does change. So,
Okay.
but that was the last year. The last year that we did do a short-term borrow was about 22,000.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, actually, I think our toughest month, I believe, is December and January, right? Because we haven't received any
Property taxes.
property tax payments. We haven't received virtually any monies from the state or federal government. So that's the month that we have to look at, and that's the month that you project. And this is, for the last 2 years, we've been able to still have maybe 3 or 4 million, I
Yes.
think, is kind of where, as low as we can get. So I think we hit that 3 or 4 million in December. And so previous years, we were actually needing to borrow months. Yeah, we needed to borrow like September, October, November, and December several years ago. We were short all those months. So it's not at the end of the year. At the end of the year, we actually have a fairly, come June, we have a fair amount of money because we have collected a lot of those monies. At that time, we have a big push from the federal government because we've reconciled all those coming in maybe May or June, Joe, is it?
That's correct. And then
Yeah.
you're getting your tax levy payments in.
Yeah, so it's not at the end of the year, but it's during the year when we need to use those monies. And December's that hard month, and January too, until we get that big bump.
Mr. Hudson?
For budgeting purposes, I'm just trying to get a grasp on this. It seems like we put about 4.5 million in our fund balance this year. And we designated some of that to go into our restricted fund for our health insurance. We're increasing our levy by about 1.6% in order to cover our increasing costs like everybody has every year. So I'm assuming we're going to end up with another $4 to $5 million surplus at the end of this year?
No.
Where's,
Better not. I mean.
well, we have been, it's been ongoing for the last,
That's
like,
one of the things that we, early on, when we were looking at deficit planning, we, I encouraged the business director to pull out all the contingencies, so we're not cutting something while we're leaving a big chunk of fund balance. So my understanding was, in order to do some of that balancing, contingencies were knocked down considerably. The only contingency I'm aware of is a certain amount, probably about a third of that amount in salaries, because at the time we didn't have the new salary structure approved, or some of the other changes to the ASME group. So unless we hit the lottery or something, there shouldn't be anywhere near that kind of surplus. And,
well, we've been hitting the lottery for like 3 or 4 years in a row.
well,
Well, that self-insurance was one of the big things too, is we had planned for that growth due to the self-insurance, and now we're into our third year. And so, but that was, it was planned because you're gonna get a bad claims year eventually, and so a lot of that was planned.
Right, but we spent those 3 or 4 years building up our reserve. and we still had a surplus. Despite putting money away on the side, we still had a big chunk of money that went into the fund balance, which is why we no longer need to borrow at the end of the year. So, you know, we saw efficiencies, which was a good thing. I mean, you know, we continued to see savings on our transportation budget. You know, I think some of that might have even been unanticipated, but we found efficiencies in routing and fuel costs and other things. So that created a surplus. So I'm really not seeing the levy adjusted to kind of match what we've been, you know, historically doing for the last 3 or 4 years.
I think the thing you missed, that you're leaving out of the equation, Mr. Edlin, is the change in the compensation structure. When you look at the savings that we've generated year to year, it's been retiring very high-cost teachers and replacing them with very low-cost teachers. At the same time, we haven't been allowing them to increase their pay to a higher cost level over that 3 to 4 year period of time. So we're kind of losing the benefit of replacing higher cost teachers with lower cost teachers, because guess what? A larger proportion of our teachers now are at the lower cost level. And at the same time, we're going to have escalated costs because we're going to start raising those into the higher cost levels. Not all the way up, but we're going to give them a little bit more, so at least they can pay their student loans. So the compensation structure that we're coming up with that we've approved as a board for our professional staff will have an impact on our fund balance going forward. So we won't be seeing the same year-to-year surpluses that we have in the past. For that reason alone, that will change things quite a bit. You know, we need to manage that, and the board does have the right to cut those things off anytime they want to. But from a competitive structure, we're going to have to pay that, or else we're going to see a continued high turnover of teachers as we bring them into the district. Mr. Adler?
I agree, and we, you know, our teachers should be compensated, and I'm sure that was taken into consideration when the budget was developed, and that's why we're increasing the levy, in order to, you know, compensate for that, because we do know that we do need to pay our teachers well. So again, we ended up with a surplus despite that, because we budget for our personnel costs every year, and we kind of have a good idea what those costs are going to be. So, okay.
Well, I think the budget is that why Mr. Gray's saying we probably won't end up with a $3 or $4 million surplus is it's definitely going to have an impact on our expenditures in that area versus prior years. I mean, there's no other way of looking at
I'm
it.
confident with the new personnel in the business office, we'll have a bit more transparency in the entire process, which will eliminate those types of issues.
I do think the conversation's a good one. One of the things Joe and I have been talking a great deal about is, you know, he's carried the ball, and he deserves a lot of credit for getting the budget to where it is now during all the transition. So I do thank him for that. But once we get this put to rest is laying out a multi-year budget projection. I think that's really when you get into the conversations you're talking about, Steve, is when you can look at it in a 3 or 4. I think to go beyond 4 years is, you know, you're guessing at that point. A lot of elections happen between now and 4 years from now. So we plan on rolling that out in, you know, probably in January, a multi-year projection. So we can start talking about some of these topics like fund balance and what's the right fund balance and those types of things. So if you, I don't want to postpone the conversation, but we need a little time to get that, to get to a place where we can have that informed conversation about those topics.
Mr. Como?
That's music to my ears, Darren. But going back to our self-insured scenario, when we do have, and it's a matter of time, when we do have that bad year, we should be fairly well prepared to replenish that fund. So if you take a look back on page 1, we have $5 million in the restricted fund for health insurance. You know, one of the things, when we have that bad year, we don't know how bad it's going to be. And I believe when we first started this process, our healthcare consultants said it's usually, in a 5-year period of time, you usually have 2 years that are bad in a 5-year period of time. So we've had 3 good years, and so we're like anticipating that it might not be good in the near future. So it'd be nice to be able to replenish that quickly too, so.
Mr. Adler?
Just one more comment. I did notice that we weren't increasing the capital improvement budget again this year, and we all know that that's been an area that we've had no direction in for quite a while. I was hoping that we would have seen a little bit more of an increase in that area. You know, we just seem to be falling further and further behind on maintenance. You know, when we got into this energy program, there were things that were brought to our attention that, quite frankly, I was very upset about because we had no clue. I mean, had we known that there was 3 out of 4 boilers were the only ones that were functioning, and they were all old, which we know they're as old as the building, I would have liked to have been a little bit more proactive on a scenario like that. And the fact that both the boilers were in such bad shape at Les Paul that they had to be replaced too, tells me that we're not getting the full picture as a board. And if we're not getting the full picture, it's hard to put together a budget and not recognize that we're not putting our eggs in the right basket. You know, we have to deal with what we're gonna do with Harvey Phillips building yet. You know, and there's another a lot of buildings around the area too, services building and whatnot. But I know that the administration is gonna be working on coming up with a plan. It's been 6 years now that I've been on the board, and I've been looking for one for quite a while. And quite frankly, Darren, that conversation came up when reviewing your resume. So we're looking forward to being able to address that in future budgets. We've had no direction for a long time, and it's been a big concern of mine as somebody who's a professional in the industry.
Yeah, that ties in with the long-range
Yeah.
projections as well. We have some information on the condition of our buildings, and that's a huge project. I mean, I'm still getting used to so many sites, but I think it will come together nicely with the budget projections, having some, you know, knowledge on the needs of the maintenance in our buildings. We can build those assumptions in. I mean, the 5 of you will agree on a set of assumptions that we'll use to build that projection. And then we can get into the nitty-gritty with maintenance and those types of topics.
Mr. Como?
And it absolutely has to be part of the projection. There's no way that you can't get around that. And that's why it's music to our ears, is we've been asking for this for quite some time. So, you know, Darren, we welcome your expertise in that area. I don't know, is January gonna be enough time for you to get your hands around it?
If I can get here full-time, I'm hoping it is.
That's a pretty big task. You might wanna give yourself a little bit of leeway on that.
At the minimum is what I hope to come back to you with it next month is a timeline of when we really think this can all be rolled out.
Sure.
The biggest hurdle now is getting the budget and levy in place. The audit's done, so last year's actuals are known. That helps you with budget projections as well. There's a draft of a facility study. I've spent some time looking into it, but it's a lengthy document. It's a solid 4 or 5 inches deep. We also need to secure some enrollment projections. We're in the process of getting those. You know, obviously, and as you know, enrollment's the driver on all this in terms of funding. We'll also talk about some options we have with the establishment of Fund 46 and some of the other things that are available to us that tie into a fund balance conversation. So we have a lot on that we'll be covering over the next, you know, several months into spring, and really developing a plan for the following year on how we're going to proceed.
Yeah, and I think that's a little bit more realistic the following year, because there's the geographic aspect, you know, where are our students located, where are our schools located, what impact does that have on our planning? Our schools aren't necessarily in the best place as compared to where our
They're hard to move.
populations are. Yeah, so, I mean, there's some pretty major things to tackle in that, and I think it's a little bit more realistic to, you know, maybe we can take a good stab at it in the next few months, but
I think
put some stakes in the ground, but there's probably going to be some ongoing studies to refine that over time.
I think a baseline fiscal forecast in early 16, January, February, somewhere, where it's just kind of status quo. If we keep doing exactly what we're doing now, and we agree on some enrollment trend, we can get a rough picture of where we think we're at. When you get into maintenance and long-term capital needs, those are the conversations that tend to take up more time, because you have more avenues of options to pursue. So I do think the conversations will start in 2016 are a 16, 17 conversation going forward, and then developing a plan. And, you know, we're on a 2-year budget cycle through the state, so that plan will be adjusted on a regular basis. It's not a one meeting, you sign off on something and it's set. As you know, you've all been on the board enough years to know that. So I think with a little time and over that period of time, I haven't sat down with Todd to talk about his, the instructional goals and all the other things. There's a whole nother
That's-
page of that book.
That's a huge component also, yeah.
And what technology's doing to instruction and where our facilities in terms of, there's a whole vast conversation yet to be had.
And that continues to change, so our curriculum needs vary. As we have new programs come along and old ones roll off, that's constantly in flux, so. But starting to get some of those components in place as those major pieces flux, it's gonna be really nice to have them tied together back to numbers. That's what we're looking for.
Mr. Edlin?
As part of the budget process, we'll carry this conversation a little bit further, but, going forward with next year's budget and facility needs, should the chair consider forming a subcommittee of this board in order to assist in making decisions to bring something forward?
The chair can consider anything, I guess, but,
We don't have to answer it right now, 'cause that's
We'll
really
think
not-
about it.
yeah.
I'd just like to share, we had this big referendum back in 2001 that we referred to earlier. That's kind of a good, looking back and transitioning forward from that, because obviously we went into 2001. I wasn't on the board at the time, but I was involved with the whole process, where we had a lot of work to do, and we passed a fairly large referendum to do that work. It was just built up work on all these buildings over time. The decision we have to make is, how much can we do over time versus having a big block of stuff to do at once. And part of what addressed some of that was the items Mr. Edlin referred to, the boilers and things like that, that was done on this energy efficiency program. That takes a big chunk out of the so-called backlog cost going forward. So we have that to factor in. We have what was done way back when, the influx of cash we just had here recently. And then we've also went ahead and did some ongoing expenditures of stuff that was in that so-called safety and efficiency thing. We went ahead and did those. That's, we heard about in technology with the security stuff. That was originally in the list of things we could have paid for through the borrow, but we decided not to do that, and then we decided we could go ahead and afford to do that without, just out of our general budget. So it's a much longer conversation that I'm going to give our new, whenever he gets to be full-time business manager. I mean, there's a lot to wrap your hands around of it. I think the starting point goes from 2001 forward, so that's a 14-year period, okay? And then what's going to be the next 5 years? So it'd be a 20-year plan, really, 2001 to 2021. What is it we need to do? What have we done? So I think that's a good way of looking at it, a 2021 plan. And I think that's enough time to put together a good, solid plan what's going to carry us through to 2021. Maybe we'll need another referendum in 2021. Let's hope not. I mean, I'm sure the community would prefer that we take care of things without that, so. Okay, so your point's well taken, but let's let administration get a handle on it first. I would say that part of the problem is I would say that the board tends to be in flux all the time about what they really want relative to a long-term plan. They they say in general we want a long-term plan, but it's not so easy to put precise, concrete things into that. In addition, we got enrollment issues. We got charter schools starting up, vouchers coming in, with the whole school finance system is gonna affect our revenue streams, and then how many buildings do we need? You know, if that continues to build, are we gonna have enough to even keep our high schools full? I assume we will, but who knows? So. So that's all the stuff that's just not answerable tonight.
Okay. I didn't want to get into the needs of the educational side of the system and that's important because the numbers drive everything, as much as the in-depth of what we really need done at our various sites. And, you know, I'd prefer that the board didn't take a hands-off approach and just all of a sudden be presented like in the 2001 referendum. Here's a great big stack of documents, and nobody really knew what was in them. They just listened and said, yep, yeah, it sounds good. Because there were things in there that weren't actually needed. I know because I did some of the things that were in that study
And there
as
were
an
thing-
outside
and there-
contractor.
And there were things that weren't in there that were actually needed that we did anyway,
Yep.
such as the upgrade of the science rooms at North High School, for example. So it kind of was a mixed match of things.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is I think the board itself needs a little bit in-depth knowledge of, you know, what's being presented in some of these studies to maybe say, you know, we'd kind of like to bring this to the board and feel confident that these are really truly needs that we're planning for and that we really need to look at and keep our buildings in good condition and upgrade them where they're needed. And, you know, rather than just being handed a big document like this, that's,
Okay. Point well taken. We better get back to approval of the budget. We're
Thank you.
kind of way off topic here, so. But I understand your points, Mr. Edlin. We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion on the budget approval tonight? Okay, so I have a motion to approve the 2015-16 budget, subject to modifications made in October. Without further discussion, no further discussion required. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
no.
Okay. 4 in favor, 1 opposed. Mr. Edlin opposed. Mr. Como?
And our final budget will be approved, is it October 27th is when we're holding our special meeting, I
Yes.
think? So, in case the public would like to know.
In case they're watching tonight. Now we're off to information items. Enough for the action items tonight. Information items, monthly budget report for September.
Okay. For the monthly budget report for September, what we have is we have, on the second and third page, we have a narrative of September. And then on the fourth page, we have, it starts the actual Skyward document with the budget. So if you were to refer to the fourth page, starting with the Skyward document that says F&F month to date on the top, if we were, and you're looking at the right-hand column, the second column where it's the September 2015-16, that shows us our local sources. We had $366,618 on local sources, and as you can see, the majority of that represents the admission fees, material fees, athletic participation fees, and parking passes. And we're consistent from where we were at this time last year. And then going into the second page of the Skyward budget document, we can see that we received our state equalization aid, which is on the second page. It's equalization aid, and that's 15% of the certified amount. So that's our primary revenue generator for the month. And if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, about the sixth column in, it shows us that our budget of revenue is at 6.1%. Compared to 7.58%. And the reason for that difference is last year, we did have, in July 2014, we had the capital lease revenue of $2.5 billion to record the value of the Apple equipment. So that accounts for the difference from the fiscal year 2014-15. And then go into the expenditure side, which is the third page of the budget document. It shows our salaries and wages and our French benefits. And as you can see, year-to-date, we're at 11.69% salaries compared to 11.86% last year. And then our benefits are right in line with last year. So everything is going along as anticipated. And we go to the next page of the budgeted report. Spending and purchase services, which is the down to the very bottom of the page, on page 4 of the Skyward document, we're at 8.64%. And some of the bigger items in there, we had $57,000 credit for selling some iPads prior to Waukesha 1. And then we had $96,000 eAchieve radio buy. And then we did have our annual license agreement for Blackboard of $116,738. Blackboard is the teacher's learning management system utilized throughout the district. And going to the next page of the budget document, we just show our non-capital supplies and our capital objects. And then it just shows in our capital objects what we were talking about earlier, is that we did recycle or repurchase those vans that were expiring from the 2008 vans that we upgraded, and we moved those over to the service building. And then we actually added another truck with a plow to replace a 1995 truck. So that was our big expenses in capital objects. So overall, just to sum up the general fund, going to the second to last page, the district spent $17.19 million, or 12.04% of the budget as of September 2015, compared to $19.07 million expended last year. And the reason, again, is the Apple equipment purchase. And in Fund 27, everything is as anticipated. So through September, everything is as anticipated budget-wise and is consistent with last year.
Okay. Any quick questions on the report? Anything further to present on that?
No.
Okay. And that, we'll move on to the update on the 2015-16 tax levy.
Okay, we've kind of
Yeah.
covered it, but
That's
if you
covered
have any other questions on it, I mean,
Just confirming, we'll be having a final meeting on October 26th.
yeah, don't make plans for the 27th.
Special meeting for the full board.
27.
27th, excuse me. Gotta get that written down. I put the 7 on, but I didn't put the 2 in front of it. Okay. Mr. Como?
Could I get a couple extra copies of this? There's a
Certainly.
couple constituents that had some detailed questions that this will help me with. I appreciate that, Joe.
Sure.
Okay, well, that,
Our friends from down the street, yeah.
with Mr. Edlin,
Yes, I did have a question on,
I was ready to close the meeting, Mr. Edlin. I hope it's a quick, I
well,
hope.
you didn't look my way before we were finished.
Oh, okay. Very well.
We budgeted a rather large increase under temporary part-time help. This is on page 3 of the budget. And I brought that up when we had our preliminary budget hearing, or preliminary budget was presented to us, and our prior business manager came back the next month and said, oh, there was some mistake here, or something. I'm on page 3 of the very top line. And this year, we budgeted $183,657, and now we're jumping up to $448,938. I don't get it.
I can check into that, but I believe what that is a classification issue with the service building staff, the ones that are coming for extra summer help. That may be a component of it, but I'll get a breakdown on that.
Well, it was under, the number was under undifferentiated curriculum. That increased last time.
Because I know I looked into this earlier,
Yeah.
and I provided that. I don't
They
recall.
may have had to reclassify substitute teachers, because they would fall under that.
Okay.
And that reclassification is due to what DPI requires, or is it a
could be-
GASB
could be that,
change, or?
Perhaps Chris wanted to keep a better track of where the sub-expenditures were coming from, secondary versus elementary. Undifferentiated is typically elementary, so it could have been something like that as well.
Could,
But
it could,
yeah.
it could be part of just keeping track of temporary part-time for Obamacare purposes, making sure that they don't go over X number of hours.
Well, there is some of that.
Once you categorize them as that, you want to make sure they don't go over those hours, so
Yeah.
probably tracking those as one group and putting as many people into that group to track as they need to track versus
That could be,
parsing them out before.
Okay. You'll let us know next month?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I guess that will do it. We're going to adjourn the meeting then. Thank you very much,